Okay, welcome to the first, not the first IROS office hour, but the first for this version. And anybody who'd like to start with any questions, Meredith is doing tech support over there somewhere. And she'll also take a look at the chat if you want to put your questions in through the chat. But if you'd like to put your questions in just by yelling, that's fine too. I yell all the time. So whoever wants to go first, go right ahead.
I'll go first. So I get a lot of pushback when I talk about phonics in context and working on fluency using poetry, etc., by those gurus who feel that systematic phonics such as the Wilson Reading Program and Orton Gillingham is a must to support students' reading. And even I tweeted one of the quotes out of the reading section you did for the Science of Reading. And the quote about building vocabulary and background knowledge, etc., it really supports students moving in their fluency. And I got sort of pushback by an Orton Gillingham trained person. And it just frustrates me because I've seen this work as a coach, as a spec ed specialist. And just the push for the systematic phonics programs is driving me crazy. Sorry, I said a lot there, but
no, that's okay. Lara, are we talking about older kids here?
Sorry, hold on. Yeah, so we're talking about we're talking about sort of students going from grade 8 into grade 9 who are still not there yet in their reading. So especially psychologists and speech and language pathologists feel that the best way to support students in increasing their reading ability is by doing like a 6-week intensive systematic phonics program, such as the Wilson. And there's another one that our district has just paid for that's bothering me, but it's just constant out of, the pushback is frustrating.
Is there argument, Lara, that the only thing these students need is systematic phonics and nothing else matters? Is that what they're saying?
That yes, for 6 weeks, they just need an intensive phonics program, and then we can work on all other pieces of Scarborough's reading work. But let's focus on phonemic awareness, morpheme, etc., and then we can get to comprehension and fluency and all the important parts. And I'm like, you're teaching kids to parrot, you're not teaching kids to read. Critical thinking is really lost when we focus on systematic phonics and not in context. When we remove the context, we remove the ability for kids to really choose reading. And it moves away from equity and it moves away from culturally relevant pedagogy.
Well, the only thing first of all, I'm not optimistic that I can give you something that will change their minds. But what I can say is this: when you're dealing with 8th and 9th graders, you're dealing with intervention, right? And as of now, there is not one single intervention study that has shown that has been successful in bringing students at this grade level or even younger to the point where they're reading at an average grade level or even like close to an average grade level. Not one. And the reason for that is threefold. And that includes studies, by the way, where they did improve their phonics, their foundational skills, but they still couldn't read at grade level because no one had addressed growing their vocabulary, no one had addressed growing their knowledge, and no one had addressed their ability to recognize different types of complex text. That being said, most of the time, they didn't grow their foundational skills either. In fact, in a couple of Florida studies, they not only did foundational skills for one period. They did it for 2 periods, and they found that 2 periods were no better than 1 period. Now, that's a very interesting finding in education. One of the most well-founded findings is if you spend twice as much time on something, you get better results. Well, why didn't you get better results when you spend twice as much time? Because if you're not addressing everything and you're not addressing how students feel about themselves and addressing their sense of efficacy, they're just going to turn you off. And especially if all you're doing is phonics, because they know that's not real reading, you're going to turn them off even more. So phonics is essential, fluency is essential, but it has to be connected to real text. It has to be embedded as much as possible in real text. You can do out of context phonics exercises if also you are connecting that knowledge that they're acquiring to tier 1 grade level relevant text in their lives so they see the reason for reading. So the only thing that none of that will bounce off of these people in all probability. But what I can do is send you a synthesis of interventions, the most recent one done by Johns Hopkins in 2018, which showed that in fact that there was no results. There was no programs that got these students to read near grade level, and show that to them and say, why? What happened? Why didn't it work? Because we've been pulling kids out to give them only systematic phonics forever, and it hasn't produced any results. So Meredith, that's the what I call the Slavin study, but he's not the lead author. So I wish I could give you something that would completely change their mind, but that's the reality. And thank you for the question, and I completely empathize and sympathize with your frustration. Okay, who's next?
David, I'll go next because your wife encouraged me to say something. I'm the one who's sitting in the dark. I'm sorry about that. It's like we're having a thunderstorm here in Connecticut. I work for EL Education, so I work a lot with kids who are using the all block, older kids who are using the all block. And typically what I have done is to add parts of the skills block into the all block for kids who are not out of foundational skills, but I'd love your opinion on other things that are needed for, say, 3rd to 6th graders.
So you're talking, Jody, about 3rd to 6th graders in the all block who are decoding and they're decoding with accuracy and automaticity. And what else do they need during the all block? Is that
right? Exactly.
Okay. First of all, that's a really good question. Morphology will always help with fluency and will always help with everything. Syntax, complex syntax. There are activities that you can do. That's another thing that I can send. Well, actually, no, EL doesn't have those kinds of activities. Bookworms does. But I can send you links to activities that develop syntax. And I can send you, and we can send you whole books devoted to morphology.
Okay.
Probably go online and find some other morphology work, but there's some good books on morphology. And there's some good exercises with syntax that are really fun and really have a solid research base. If you're talking about kids who are reading at grade level with fluency, then in addition to those 2 things, the only things I could recommend are to take a look at their writing and to take a look at, and other than that, just deal with the comprehension from the complex text, which is one of the options, I believe, in all block.
It is, yep. Additional work with complex text is an option, yeah.
And you could use that complex text also once you see these syntax activities. So additional work with complex text, syntax activities, morphology, and any kind of word games that, well, they don't even need word games at that point. So I would go with just that: morphology, syntax, and additional work with complex text.
Thank you so much.
I would also add working with the school to share the fluency load across subject areas with older kids, you know, explicitly in social studies, explicitly in science, to read other chunks during the day and do morphology.
These are two good questions. Anybody else?
This is Chris Ann LaHue from the District of Columbia Public Schools. I'm sorry, I don't know Zoom and I don't know how to share the screen. But I have two questions, and one's on the easier side and one can wait. It's a little on the harder side. But my first question is, I work in 9 schools and I believe that close reading of complex text sets, skillfully guided by practitioners, having the students interact with the text multiple times, it's all coming out of your course, is the #1 way to address the broadest strokes of need and the most outcomes at any given time. I believe it should be multiple subjects. I don't think it's just the English teacher. These are all things I know we share. My question is, as a leader of 9 assistant principals who lead 9 teams of teachers, some of whom may have been taking your course recently, right now, what advice or words of wisdom would you share when a teacher still says, I don't understand close reading, why should I do that? Like, what's the elevator answer? You know what I'm saying? Like, I understand, but I always take too many words to answer that.
That's a really good question. The close reading is like it's like a two-faced, not two-faced, that's the wrong term, but it's got two parts to it. One is that if your students aren't reading at grade level, then, and you want them to read text at grade level, you don't want the students in the position that we've put them in for like 50 years of only reading text below grade level. How do you intend to do that if you're not doing something as supportive as close reading? That would be my first answer to them. And I'd wait and give them a chance to respond. And I found that helpful. And then teachers kind of nod their head or they get it. Yeah, I guess that's it. It's either leveled text, which we've been doing forever, or the kind of support that comes in close reading. The second part, and why I say close reading has 2 parts to it, is it's the absolute best way to understand how complex text works. Complex text is text that might have more than one theme, and the theme might be subtle. It has connections. You have to connect one part of the text to another, but it's not like in complex text where sentence 3 inevitably leads you to understand sentence 4. That's not the way it works. Sentence 3 might inevitably lead you, if you look at it, to understand sentence 9. And unless you point, what other way is there to point out these elements of complex text other than close reading? Are you going to then we're going to have a lesson on connecting different parts of a text. And I'm going to find some silly, ridiculous text. And I'm going to ask you to circle line 3 and see how it connects to line 5, or line 9. As opposed to in any text you're working with, if you do close reading, you can look at how different parts of the text connect. You can look at how vocabulary, different meanings of certain words might shift the understanding of the text in a different way. You can open up any possibility with complex text. You can't do that with any other form of instruction. So those are the 2 things that I would say to them. Number 1, I'd start with, as I said, if your students are reading below grade level, are you willing for them to only read below grade level texts? And if not, how are you going to do it without support, the kind of support that close reading provides? And number 2, what do you have as a better way to look at all the different ways that text can be complex? So that would be that. And if you want to go on, Chris Ann, if that makes sense, if you want to go on to your more difficult question, if nobody objects, any objections to Chris Ann asking a second question? Seems like you've got a supportive crew here. Go ahead.
Well, the second question is, first of all, that was really, really good. That gave me 2 like super nuggets, but I still run into teachers who are, our work in DCPS is a lot about building reading comprehension and having them demonstrate it through writing. We want the students to write to show what they understand. So we are working on asset-based student written responses. In other words, evaluating the students' written responses based on the comprehension that is demonstrated rather than deficits that are absent. And we find the teacher mindset issue very complex, complicated, in that they're preoccupied with students' writing skills and they disregard then students' comprehension. So I've done work with student work where there was tremendous comprehension being demonstrated, and then the only response is to the written form, that the deficits in their writing. And as I work with the APs who are like mostly on board, like for the most part, they really believe and want to move forward with this difficult thread of work. But that said, I'm still thoughtful about how to respond to teachers who say, but they just can't write, when the first job is reading comprehension and then the second job is demonstrating it through writing. They think the first job is getting this kind of proficient writing.
I'm not sure I understand the question. Is there objection that they don't want to, if they want to focus solely on the writing without?
Yeah,
going
it's
back?
the same problem we run into. They want to do discrete skill instruction.
Okay,
They teach like simile instead of what does it mean. They want to teach like there should be 5 sentences in formulaic writing. The sentence number 1 does this, sentence number 2 does that. And what we want them to shift to is writing to communicate their thinking, their understanding. So then we can give feedback or respond to what they understand or what they think instead of the form. It's the content over form puzzle that we've really had a hard time with.
the only thing that I can say is we're preparing students for college and career. And when they get to college and career, the task that they're going to be presented with is to respond in writing to some kind of query, whether it's an understanding of something that they're reading in college for a course in anything from graphics to engineering to humanities. The goal of the written response is to demonstrate their understanding of what they've been discussing in class and what they've read. And the fact of the matter is that most instructors at the college level, having been one for a number of years, in community college, does this text tell me that the student understands what we're talking about in class? And does this writing tell me that the student has a sense of what we understand in class, of what we're discussing in class, and have a sense of the readings that I've given them? Not have they followed with precision the 5-part essay or something like that. So, and the same thing, I am sure, although I'm not as familiar with the business world, but if an employer asks an employee to respond in writing to some problem, they're going to look for, did they get the gist, or did they know what I'm asking them? Not, was the topic sentence right, or anything like that. So why are we preparing them for a future that really doesn't exist? And actually, when the standards first came out, when we were doing the research for the standards, when some of you know that I synthesized the research in Appendix A for the standards, part of that research was inventories or focus groups with college professors and employers. And they unanimously said, we are not looking for style. We are not looking for that kind of essay or that kind of well-structured paragraph. We're looking for, did they get meaning from what we asked them to do? So I think that's what you have to turn around and say to the APs or to the teachers. What are we preparing our students for? And it doesn't mean that we should completely give up on more precise writing in the form of an essay structure or a paragraph structure or a constructed response or anything like that. but it has to be both. If you eliminate meaning, then you're not going anywhere. You're also boring the shit out of the kids because meaning is more interesting than a 5-part essay or where you put the paragraph, how you structure your paragraph. So I hope that's helpful. Both of those questions, Chrisanne, were really good.
Thank you.
Yes, Shannon.
Hello, David. Hello, Meredith. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, and Meredith just gave the thumbs up.
Okay, wonderful. It's good to see you again. I'm literacy coach at Tom Joy Elementary. I saw you a while back in Nashville as we were learning about CKLA implementation. We had much
great.
chat.
Great.
We're moving to Wit and Wisdom this year, and our school is adding 5th grade. And my question for you goes back to your article, the both and literacy instruction for K-5, and that you talk about all the components and things that need to be in the literacy block. We have 120 minutes for literacy instruction. And so my question for you is, with 5th grade coming on board and knowing that these 5th graders did not receive CKLA skills in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade, so they're struggling with some of that. We've been working on it, but they had a lot of knowledge base, but they didn't have a lot of skills. And they also did not have a lot of small group reading once we went to knowledge focus. What would you say we need to do with that 120 minutes in our structured curriculum in this year coming up with 5th graders?
Okay, they're using Wit and Wisdom, right?
Yes, sir.
Wit and Wisdom has built-in fluency work so that those students who are disfluent, there's a lot of things in Wit and Wisdom to address their disfluency. The problem you're going to have is how many of those kids are not only disfluent, but aren't even decoding with
Correct.
accuracy and automaticity. Can you give me a ballpark figure on how high that number is likely to be?
Well, let's just say that I only had 2 students that were at or above in 4th grade at the end of 4th grade,
All right, well,
according to Lexia data.
yeah, well, that's good enough. Some of those students will move with just the fluency instruction. Others are going to need more systematic, more phonics and word recognition work. And I'm kind of embarrassed to say, I don't think Wit and Wisdom, even though I worked a lot with Wit and Wisdom, don't think they built that in.
They did not. And we
Okay.
were pulling from the CKLA lessons for our 3rd graders to bridge that gap as they're coming in from 2nd grade. But I don't know what to do for my 5th graders.
Okay, I think you need to do what we talked about in IROS. And I don't
Okay.
know where you are in IROS, but and have you read chapter 7 of our book? Or have you read?
I don't think I have the book. I just have the articles that you put out.
Okay, well, I think
I'll buy
I
it.
think we sent out chapter 7. No? Yes.
Yes.
We sent
Okay, I
out
haven't
chapter
gotten
7.
7.
So we'll send you chapter 7. It should be in the IROS course.
Okay.
Or you could buy the whole book. We make about a nickel on each one that's sold. I would say this. Chapter 7 and somewhere in IROS talks about integrating phonics instruction into tier 1 text. So I think what
Okay.
you need to do is use your tier 1 text, and Wit and Wisdom has beautiful, meaningful, complex text. Using what you see in chapter 7 and in IROS, integrate phonics instruction, but you're going to need more. The phonics instruction that we talk about in chapter 7 and in IROS are games where you point out certain phonics patterns in the tier 1 text.
Okay.
That way, and then you do some games and some activities to develop those students' awareness. So you see the EIGH pattern, you have kids circle 3 or 4 words like way or neighborhood that have the EIGH pattern, and then you play some games with it. That's a start, but they're going to need repetition. So you need a workbook or some kind of additional activity. Now, if you have access to CKLA,
Mhm.
CKLA has something called the,
The ARG
yeah, what's the full name for it? The Assessment Remediation.
assessment remediation guide.
ARG.
Yeah.
So let's say you're working on on EIGH patterns. Then you go into the assessment and remediation guide, which weighs about 10 pounds. And so it has everything. And you pull out a bunch of worksheets on EIGH. So what you have to do is you have to embed the instruction with EIGH into the tier 1 text. So that way the students see that this is real. This is going to help me read real text. It avoids the problem that Lara was talking about, where the kids don't do any of that. They just do
Right.
exercise. But in this case, they see I need to be able to know that EIGH makes an A sound. Otherwise, I'm not going to be able to read this kind of text. And you do some exercises and games with the actual text. You can do that because you've got a 2-hour block, which is really smart.
Mhm.
And then, but they've got to go home or they've got to have some time where they do some exercises with repetition with the EIGH pattern. One way is to get that with the assessment and remediation guide. Ideally, what I tell schools is that somebody should be assigned to take the assessment and remediation guide and pull out all those phonics patterns and put them in folders or packets so the teacher doesn't have to
Okay.
GH pattern, go to the freaking room where they make the copies, stay
Mhm.
with them and do all that. That's not
Okay.
if you can do that, that's ideal. And I've actually seen some schools do it where the teachers then go to a central storage area and there it is, EIGH, AI, multisyllabic words, pull it out and do it. But that makes way too much sense for every district in this country to do something like that. The other thing is to look at a workbook series called Explode the Code, which we used in our school because it's right there. So then you need EIGH, you look it up in the table of contents and you give them the 5 or 6 pages and you assign the 5 or 6 pages in that workbook about EIGH so those kids can really reinforce and cement their learning on the EIGH pattern. And ideally, they can do it and take it home. Because once you've taught it,
Mhm.
they know EIGH makes an A sound, then it's just a matter of seeing the repetition. And some kids need more repetition than others. So you have 2 options, the ARG or Explode the Code. And the good news is we now have research that if you use a workbook, you won't go to hell.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. That's a really on-target question. I find these questions and answers that when the questions are, I can't remember a question that wasn't good in some way or the other and helpful to some number of people. I am now muting my.
So my question.
I just wanted to say, just a sec, there is somebody from Great Minds on the call. So I don't know if they also wanted to speak to that.
I think everything that David recommended is the right way to go. Great Minds does work with Wilson's Foundation, so that is the program that they use. But I think all of the interventions that he mentioned and the open source CKLA, I came from Louisiana, so we often had to support that because many of our schools use CKLA with Wit and Wisdom as well. So I 100% agree with all the guidance he gave.
Thank you. And I just want to also say that the state of Tennessee has kind of rebranded the CKLA phonics, and that's also open source if you need some things there for that. And we have the Sounds First materials as well, which are great. Thank you so much for contributing there.
I will also add that I am the 912 person, so the K5 people would probably give a much better answer than I just did.
Thank you.
Just quickly, the Tennessee is online free, as long as you can't sell it, but you can use it. And it has CKLA foundational skills, which is excellent. And it has the sounds first, which is phonemic awareness, which is excellent. But it's not really geared to older students. For older students, you have to do what I said to Holly, to Shannon, and connect it to tier 1 and gamify it as much as possible. Anybody else? These have been really good questions, as I keep on saying.
I have a question. My district we're in a tiny district. We're in New Hampshire. There's only 100 students, and that's K-8. So it's tiny. And
Jeez.
it is, it's really tiny. I mean, it's amazing. I've only been there for 3 years, and it's mind boggling after being in a much larger district for 15 years. But so we have different problems than other people have, because we have classes that are really small and classes that are really big. And we have teachers that haven't stayed for very long. And so now we're looking at foundational skills. I'm going from the classroom teacher to being the interventionist, because the interventionist really wasn't doing much. So I'm just trying to figure out how best to support all kids as an interventionist. But what I'm realizing is we have foundations for basic phonics skills, but it's not being used consistently. And so I suggested that we look at other programs and think about, maybe let's pick something that you'll all use, or something. We've got to come up with a plan that works, because as being a third grade teacher for 15 years, I know that when kids hit third grade, the ones that can't read are the ones that don't understand the phonics. And and they can slide right through really nicely to third grade. But third grade is when you start doing multisyllabic words and you start really falling apart. And so how do I help people that are in a really small spot to see the value of doing things together? Because they're like, oh, I'm doing the standards, I'm doing just fine.
Yeah.
And do you have a preferred program that you recommend? I'm doing OG training this week, and that seems like, yeah, that's going to work, but it's really slow motion. I don't know. I've got a couple of kids I sent to 5th grade that I want to pull and work with them too. So it's just like I'm trying to save the world.
I can talk about programs, but before that, 2 questions that are important. Is there a core ELA program that the school is using, or is it figuring
Not right now. We had Reading Wonders, but it's the old Reading Wonders, and it's dated, and people have basically abandoned it.
Yeah, well, they should abandon the new one too. But the okay, so that's good to know. So basically, at this point, the teachers are on their own because they're not using Wonders, and they have okay. Second question, equally important. Why do you think they're not doing foundations?
Well, the kindergarten teacher thinks she knows everything, so she doesn't need to have a program.
I don't know if I have a cure for that, but.
Well, she's been teaching kindergarten for 13 years, and she thinks she knows everything. The 1st grade teacher is trying to make sense of it, but she thinks it's very boring. And the 2nd grade teacher, who is moving to 4th grade, basically didn't understand phonics whatsoever. So when you do training and foundations, you get a 1-day training, and they basically hand you the textbook and say, here you go, read from the book. So you don't understand anything. The 2 days I've spent with OG, I've learned so much in such a short period of time.
All right, I have 2 suggestions. I don't know if they're going to solve your kindergarten teacher's problem. Some people don't want to ever admit that they got something wrong or anything. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken to hundreds of teachers and tell them what I screwed up on. Like when the standards came out and SAP had really the country's attention, we should have hammered away at foundational skills more. We did not. That was my fault. It was not David Coleman's fault. What does he know about foundational skills? It was on anybody's fault but me and Meredith, but I'll take the brunt of it, because at that time I was the foundational skills guy.
I feel horrible that I've been teaching with a master's in reading, and I have taught kids ineffectively for the last 10 years. I'm beginning to realize.
The day we stop making mistakes is the day we're buried, or shortly before that. I have 2 recommendations, HD Plus and HD. Are an excellent program for foundational skills.
Is that
Really great, I'm
reading?
sorry, really great reading.
That's what I thought, yeah.
That's one of the programs in really great reading. I've
Yeah.
dug into it a lot recently. It moves well. It's easy. Teachers can grasp it. It may move a little too fast if you've got a lot of severely disabled students, but it's a program that covers everything. They have an option for the first month's work to be done slower that you can look at. But it moves fast, which could be a problem, but it explains things to teachers and it's easy to do. So that's one option. That will cost money. The CKLA, as I think Holly said or someone else said, is free online now at the in a bunch of places. And it also, if you do it through Tennessee, it also includes phonemic awareness. That's another option. There's a third option that is very different, and that's American Reading Company. But teachers who've really had a lot of trouble with phonics and with systematic phonics, American Reading Company kind of disguises it. It really is systematic phonics, but there's so much fun stuff going on, and it's so student-centered and so gamified that that's a third option.
Okay.
I can't tell you which of these three, which would be the best, but I would seriously recommend looking at all three.
Okay.
And if you need someone to help you with American, and I think some of you know, I've supported American Reading, full disclosure. I've helped American Reading Company, they've paid me. I've helped Wit and Wisdom, they've paid me. I've helped CKLA, they've paid me. So I would seriously recommend looking at all three.
Okay.
Some teachers really find that when they look at American Reading Company, they drop their guard. And one teacher said, I didn't even know I was doing phonics. So it's definitely different, but I would look at all three.
Okay, I definitely will. Thank you. I've sent away for a bunch of samples from a bunch of different companies, and it's interesting to see how they get at, especially the foundational phonics. A lot of them say that they're doing it, but it's a one size fits all and too darn fast.
The other one Meredith just reminded me is bookworms, which is also very different. And bookworms is easier than any of them and has gotten some really good results rather quickly. That's a core ELA program. You can't just adopt the foundational skills like you could CKLA
Okay.
or even American Reading Company. That's a full core. You either deck the whole thing or you do nothing. But all you're paying for is the books. The curriculum is on OER and it's free. But there's really no free in ELA.
Yeah, there's no such thing as free.
Children need books. If you want free, do math. They don't need.
I think the tricky part with ELA too is that the books get very dated very fast. I mean, kids, you know, I did Peter Pan last year and that went over really well, but you have to really sell books that are.
That's true. I think Wit and Wisdom's books are beautiful, but that's something that needs to be considered, especially now in the age where we're focusing on CRP. An advantage to American Reading Company is you don't have to use the books that are built into the curriculum. You can actually use other books. It's designed to be used with any book you choose. That's only true of American Reading Company.
Okay. I will definitely check them all out. Thank you. You've been very helpful.
Certainly.
I guess I'll go ahead and go next, if that's okay.
There's no punishments for people who ask two questions or who speak twice.
No problem. So hi, David. I had the pleasure of having dinner with you at the Teacher Leader Summit in Louisiana with Whitney and Angel and the American Reading Company crew.
Really?
That's in-person summit. Yeah.
Oh.
So I selfishly just kind of want to hear the David Lieben elevator pitch on this. I thought the way somebody phrased it as an elevator pitch before was helpful. In thinking, like, I understand close reading and volume of reading and the benefits of both. But in the shifts, what's really articulated and elevated is building knowledge and vocabulary through the reading of, you know, informational text. Volume of reading in high school, I feel often leans to recommending as a teacher and as a former high school teacher, these books that are thematically related, but not necessarily are going to support the building of the knowledge and vocabulary for students who lack that piece. So I was just wondering if you could talk about what is the role of those thematically related texts that are beautiful in their own right, and how can we balance VOR to make sure we're not only putting forth great thematic texts that are beautiful, but building that vocabulary and content knowledge that's essential.
Well, see if this helps, Holly, and if it doesn't, please tell me. We can't abolish literature in ELA. You have to have literature. And so how do you marry great literature with texts that will maximize the growth of vocabulary and knowledge? And you know, the way you do it is your core text can be a piece of fiction, whether it's historical fiction or not. It could be, for example, I think this is in Wit and Wisdom, and it's the older grades, but that fits with you. One of the texts they use is, what's the one?
Midsummer Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream, thank you. And one of the themes of Midsummer Night's Dreams is romance and love, which will work for it will work for 8th grade girls. There are 8th grade boys who will likely turn that off, but they may turn it off, but they may sneak in a bit of attention now and then. And it's not an informational text. It's clearly great literature, but it's about love. There's a lot of informational text written about love. And what they did in Wit and Wisdom, they had text sets or series of texts on the biology of love, on the chemistry of love. And there were other pieces of information about informational texts about attraction and romance and love and the connection between friendship. And they were quite complex. Mm-hmm. So you can have a piece of text that is literary, and then supplement it with a volume of reading at text at different levels that grows vocabulary and grows knowledge and takes advantage of that research showing that a series of texts on a topic maximizes vocabulary and knowledge growth. It's pretty easy with historical fiction. You can have a core text that is My Brother Sam is Dead, if you're familiar with that, or Johnny Tremaine, if you're really old and are familiar with that, and then have series of informational texts on the American Revolution. It takes some creativity sometimes, but Wit and Wisdom has done it. American Reading Company has done it. I think Cornellage is beginning to do it. And that's the way I would do that. And that's the best way to marry the two. The problem is in the past, before these new programs and before the standards, it was all thematic. Theoretically, a child could go from kindergarten to 8th grade with hardly ever setting eyes on a text that was not literature, that was not literary. And I think we've cracked that. Is that helpful, Holly?
It is. If I can just ask a clarifying question. I think I get how to do close reading around those informational texts, but the ones that, as I'm in the high school grades, the ones that I think truly build the vocabulary and knowledge are so complex in their own right. I'm having trouble deciding how we could build out like some VOR text that students could read independently that would do that outside of like the instructional text that we use for.
Okay, good. I get it. I cited earlier a 2018 synthesis of all intervention programs and showed that virtually none of them brought students up to reading at average. But what was very interesting was programs that used two interventions that included two programs did better than the others. In fact, they did actually 2.5 to 3 times better, which is a lot. Still, the students weren't where we wanted them to be for a variety of reasons, but they did two to 3 times better than all the others. And they used 2 programs that were part of these interventions. Probably everyone here, many of you know these programs probably. One was Achieve 3000 and one was Accelerated Reader. Now, what Achieve 3000 does is it simply assesses the student's ability at some Lexile level and then gives a series of informational texts at that level. And so it wasn't that there was anything beautiful about Achieve 3000, but what it did was it provided a series of texts at different levels and connected to the topic. So if they were studying the American Revolution, Achieve 3000 would give 4 or 5 or 6 texts or 7 texts connected to the American Revolution. Some were connected more tighter than others, but they were at least something about American history, but they were at students' levels. So in their core program, they were reading a complex text, just like Wit and Wisdom and CKLA and ARC, et cetera, an American Reading Company, but then they had the volume of reading at different levels. So some students started at a lower level, some students started at a higher level. And Achieve and the other program, Accelerated Reader, used to only have fiction, but now it has short informational texts also. So the interventions that included a volume of reading at a lower level, because your point is good, Holly, the informational text that some programs might include at the high school level don't give a volume of reading because they're too complex. And Doug Fisher, who many of you might know from Fisher and Frey, when we went to visit their high school, they had Achieve 3000, but interestingly, they were using it in the social studies class and in the science class. So in both the social studies class and the science class, a part of each week, the students just went online and used Achieve 3000. So if they were studying they were studying photosynthesis and the biology of plants, they went online and they got 5 or 6 texts on plants that might not have been exactly precise what they were reading in the science class, but it was connected to plants. And for 15 or 20 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week, which adds up in the course of a full year, they were getting a volume of reading on that topic. And they were getting it in social studies and in science. So that, of course, that's another question, how to get social studies and science teachers to do that, which is not easy. But it's that volume of reading at different levels that I think you would need to get. And Achieve 3000 would provide that. And so apparently, although I'm not as familiar with it, would Accelerated Reader. And the other thing is to put it together yourself using ReadWorks or Newsella or like 4 or 5 other programs now that do the same thing that I'm not equally familiar with. Does that help, Holly?
That helps a lot. What I was hoping is you would tell me there was a silver bullet other than telling teachers they need to pull it together from the other sources, but seems like it's not there yet. But thank you for that.
Well, the silver bullet came from the Lone Ranger. I was going to say the Lone Ranger was fiction, but Meredith just sent me something today that said that there actually was a real Lone Ranger, but I'll bet you he didn't make bullets out of silver. And he was black to boot. Was not the fictionalized Lone Ranger. If anybody wants that, Meredith will send it to them. We are on a roll here. Anybody else?
Yes, this is Tanya Salisbury. I apologize, my camera is not working. I am an elementary literacy specialist for one of the larger school districts in the state of Ohio. And I'm really, I'm going to go back to what Mitzi was talking about, like shifting that mindset with teachers. I'm excited to say that I actually have done a book study with our district elementary teachers with your book, Know Better, Do Better. I have done the study with over 250 teachers. We have read that book together and talked about it. And it really, I want to connect this to what Mitzi was saying. We have a lot of teachers that were a bit defiant because they had been trained in whole language. They were not, they weren't going easily into this transition to the science of reading. And so your book was so wonderful. And we've been doing the book studies for 2 years. And I have teachers this summer. They're so excited. We did purchase Wit and Wisdom for our upper elementary grades. And I have my K2 teachers so excited to just transition into some of the ideas that they read about in your books. So you have made such a huge impact in my school district, and I am so excited to be a part of it. I guess for me, I'm watching these teachers who are very defiant really start to come around because of the conversations that were brought about while we were reading that book together. And, looking through all the resources mentioned and that kind of thing. And so teachers, that mindset is shifting. And I wanted just to give Mitzi some hope that that can happen, because we have a very huge school district, and teachers that were very not willing to even open their mind to it are really wanting to actually participate in the conversations at this point. And so here's my question. That was a long introductory piece to my question. So after we've read your book, and it's such a great foundation for that mindset shift, what do you think is the next step for elementary teachers to keep that knowledge building happening with the teachers? What do you think? Is there another book that would be so beneficial to read together and discuss, or something like that? What is your advice on keeping the momentum going? Because we are really doing something great right now, and I just don't want to lose it.
That's a really good question. Well, first, let me say that your introduction didn't just make my day. It might have made my week or month. So thank you for that. That was our hope with the book, because we've dealt, because we've been in schools, and we started a school, and we dealt with whole language and everything else. And that hope infused our book. What will the teachers, the upper grade teachers, 3 to 5, are going to be using Wit and Wisdom, and K to 2 will be using what?
So at this time, we use Foundations, and the district purchased the Wilson Geodes, which is also from Great Minds, actually, that would go with the Foundations for those foundational pieces. And we did not purchase a program like Wit and Wisdom for K2 yet. We didn't want to overwhelm them. Switching to Foundations, we finally have all the teachers doing Foundations, which was a feat in itself because of that resistance. But now everybody's on board with that. And so the school district purchased Geodes to complement the Foundations work for next year. So it's a bit of a baby step, but that's what we have for K2 right now.
We're talking about a large urban district?
Yes, suburban.
Okay, but large.
Yeah.
All right, so the K to 2 has Foundations, and they have Geodes, and Geodes are beautiful.
I'm excited about those.
All right, here's the story with Foundations. A few things. First of all, it doesn't have the phonemic awareness that it needs. It doesn't have advanced phonemic awareness. Are you familiar with that term from?
Yes, I am. And we actually, we use the Hegarty Phonemic Awareness Program and bridge the gap for the tier 2 type intervention for grades 2 through 5.
Good. So you got Hegarty. That'll solve one problem with Foundations. A second problem with Foundations is it's not a lot of fun. But you know how to build in fun from our book. So
yes,
in as many games and as much fun and as much meaning as possible from our book, and you will address the second problem with Foundations. Here's the third and biggest problem with Foundations, but eminently solvable. Foundations was designed to be done for 60 minutes, 30 minutes as tier 1. Everybody does whatever the lesson is, but then there's a second 30 minutes that the teachers use for those students who they know either are struggling and need to go back a little or need more on that day's work. And if you do foundations that way, as it was designed for 60 minutes, 30 minutes to do the lessons on the systematic phonics, and 30 minutes for those kids who you know needed it more, either based on assessments or based on just teachers' perceptions. What's happened with foundations is it was the most popular systematic phonics program when the country was resisting systematic phonics. So teachers got it. It was shoved down their throat by somebody, either at the school level or at the district level. And then they just gave 10 minutes because they couldn't stand it and because it wasn't much fun. And of course, it didn't work because it was designed to be 60 minutes and it was freaking boring. So if you do those three things, do Haggerty, make foundations as fun as possible. There's no such thing as too much fun. No, there's no such thing as too much vocabulary. There's no such thing as too much vocabulary. There's no such thing as too much fun. Build in fun and then do it like it was designed to be done with that extra 30 minutes. Then if you have that and you have geodes, I think you're fine. There's a coda that I want to add to that, but I first want to see if that makes sense to you or to anybody else.
That does make sense to me. And at this point, so the district purchased foundations before I was in the position of literacy specialist. And at this point, they are utilizing it. I would say a majority of our teachers in schools are using it with fidelity, as you just mentioned. And we have worked through some of those kinks with it being boring, because that was right away, people were talking about it being boring. So we have worked in games. We have worked in that it's used tier 1, but then that little tier 2 for students. We do have that's going well, I would say. My biggest thing is just what to do next with teachers to keep the conversation with their colleagues and peers going, because I think those discussions are what has really piqued the interest of teachers to move forward and read the research about reading and want to do better. I know that's funny, but it's true. They do know better after going through that book together, and they really do want to do better. So that's where I'm going.
What's the PD program? How often do your teachers get together for PLCs, et cetera?
So we have something called teacher-based teams, and they meet once a week. Typically grade level teams at each building meet at least once a month. I'm in the district position, so I get to design district PD however I want it. And so they haven't had, before I took this position, the district wasn't really providing district PD. And so it has been really great because teachers from across the district and different schools get together and start talking, which has been really beneficial, because sometimes when they just talk within their own buildings, they don't branch out and open their minds to learn about other things. So the district PD, it can be designed however I want it to look. So I'm kind of in a good position for that.
Okay, remind me, I should have said this earlier, remind me how Foundations addresses fluency.
Are you asking me that question?
Yeah.
I don't think it has very few fluency pieces to it. Foundations, it's not really strong with fluency. I can only speak to how it addresses like our state standards that we work with, and fluency is not a strong point.
Okay, but fluency from Know Better, Do Better, so you can build.
Yes.
And you could build it in with geodes, or you could build it in with any grade level text you want.
Yeah.
Here's what I suggest. You design your your professional learning program, so it works like this using an iteration. So you begin with how things got in the first week, like how things got started. You take every every grade that you're working with, K to 2, introduced foundations to the, and they began with some lessons, and you ask teachers to report in that first week, so that in K to 2, the first week is just survival. So I'm talking about the second week or the third week, whatever it is. And teachers report on what went really well with foundation, what went well with our gaming it, what went well with our making it fun, what went well with the second part where you had that second 30 minutes. And everybody comes into PL to report what worked and what didn't. And at those sessions, working with the teachers, because some teachers will have great ideas about what worked and some teachers will be lost. And you come to some conclusion where you said, okay, here's what we're going to do to make this part better. Here's what we're going to do to make the gaming better. Here's what, well, you pick one, whether it's the gaming or the fluency or the actual lessons themselves or the second 30 minutes. You pick one part of the K to 2 Foundations program that you talk about at week 3, let's say, PL. And then in week 4, everybody comes back and reports what they did and how it worked. And then you move on to something else. Okay, so we worked in week 3, and week 4, we talked about how to make this thing more fun. And we all talked about what worked, what didn't. Now we're going to go on to the second 30 minutes. What worked with the second 30 minutes with your weakest readers? And again, the teachers come back, they report what worked, what didn't work. You talk about it, you come up with suggestions, they go and they try it. And then the next time they come, they report how that worked. So it's like iterative. You take it and you slice it into piece by piece, and you do that as the basis of your PL program. Meredith has something to add to that. I'll go as long as everybody here is willing to go.
I may go back there at some point.
Does that help?
Yes, that was really helpful. And I like that you talked about the fluency piece. One thing that I did notice when we were doing the book study, people were really interested in those fluency packets that were mentioned that in your book. And so I think maybe that helps guide me a little bit. Like, I think the disfluency piece of foundations is something to address that we haven't really addressed. So I think your ideas are really relevant, and that will help me, actually. Thank you very much.
Good. Okay, I'm willing to go past 6 if anybody still has questions or comments.
I have a question. This is Tiffany
Okay.
Goldberg. I'm from Indiana, and I have been a teacher for 21 years, many of which have been in language arts. For several years, I was a reading interventionist at the junior high level, and then I took a position as a language arts teacher at another corporation, and I'm now being moved to instructional coach. And one thing that we have recognized that we need to do a better job of is our intervention program. However, we don't have the funds to hire a certified interventionist. So we have a non-cert who is kind of in that role of interventionist, and we've always used computer-based programs. They used Study Island before I was there, and then they moved, the elementary used Moby Max. So my question is, going into this instructional coach role, what could I encourage my non-cert in this role to do with our students besides the computer-based program?
What grades are we talking about, Tiffany?
We're talking about 7 and 8, but I'm also going to be an instructional coach for grades 9 through 12 also this year.
And in 7 and 8, is there a core ELA program that the schools are using?
Well, it's always been the teachers create their curriculum based on the standards. So they're the ones, they don't have a program. We've always used the standards to guide the curriculum.
And probably the same in 9 to 12, right?
Yes, yes.
And the intervention block is how long?
About 30 minutes, but it could go 45.
And these kids are behind, let's say, ranging from 2 years to 5 years behind.
Yes, yes.
All right, well, this is not an easy problem to solve. And as I think I said at some point in the IROS, if we don't, 45 minutes, 30 to 45 minutes is really hard to solve this problem because students are not just lacking in foundational skills, they're lacking in vocabulary and they're lacking in knowledge. I think that the tech programs that you mentioned, are they being used in the intervention block?
Yes, for some of it.
And how much time do they take?
They get about 15 to 20 minutes for language arts and about 15 to 20 minutes for math.
So the intervention block for language arts is only 50.
About 20 minutes at max, yeah.
Well, I hate to say this, but I don't know what to do with a 15 to 20 minute language block to catch up kids that are this far behind. I think the best thing you could do is the fluency work in reading in Know Better, Do Better.
Okay.
And that will move some kids up. It will not move everybody up. I mean, I want to be honest with you. Those kids who need word work are not going to get to where you want them to get. But if you've got 20 minutes of time with ELA, the best thing to do is fluency work. And I would use the text that they're reading in their class.
Okay.
One text, even for those kids who are far behind. That is the best way for you to maximize growth in such a short period. And then I could tell you a lot more if you could convince your principal or principals to stretch the intervention to 2 periods instead of 1, 2 periods for ELA instead of 1. And then there's a lot of other things you could do as was in the book and as you heard with some of the talk we had today. But the absolute best way in 20 minutes or 25 minutes or whatever it is to do the fluency work as it is in Reading Done Right, in the fluency chapter and in chapter 7, both.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Certainly.
Good afternoon or evening. I'm Lori James. I'm with Prince George's County Schools in Maryland, and we've got about 131,000 in our district. I feel really blessed right now because we're at the beginning point of turning this ship around towards systematic phonics. And what they're doing, instead of just throwing a program at us and saying, do this now, they've had us in letters training. So by the end of the summer, I think about 1/3 of the K-2 teachers will have completed the letters training, and the others will begin to take the rest of that group will have it beginning in the fall. So it feels like a lot of people are really excited about what we're learning. We're excited about, like, I just want to use this now. Like, what are we going to, we don't even know what program is going to be purchased to put all this into action. But I think that starting with teacher buy-in is a unique way to do it from what I'm hearing in terms of the resistance that you all are getting. So I appreciate that. I'm also a reading recovery teacher, so we come from the other end of it. So I'm sort of hearing both sides of the reading wars. And I'm like, well, actually, what I do is, if it's not called systematic, it's like I am following the child and giving them what they need at this point. And it kind of, we've got the Wiley Blevins books also that we did some PDs on. So I'm using some of his scope and sequence in terms of how I want to introduce different words at different levels. He has a way of marrying both, so this has been unique. Again, I'm K-2, but I was just curious about what the big kids are doing. What do you do with the big kids? How does that work? So this program has been really helpful. Just comments, no questions.
Good. That's interesting.
Just comments.
And it's interesting what Prince George is doing. It is a big district. I'm familiar with it.
It's huge.
It's hard to turn around 130,000 kids, and it makes it harder, the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, Prince George County has a pretty mixed demographic.
Huge, absolutely. And we have a lot of flux with teachers. That's to me the biggest problem that we have is, how do you hold on to teachers? They come, they get trained, and they leave.
Yeah.
Please stay.
Some statistics show that the average length of in urban schools, the average turnover rate is like 3.2 years or something.
It's ridiculous. Is that
Yeah.
like, if you're gonna be a teacher, teach. Show me what you can
Right.
do here. I'm
It's
not-
less than an NFL running back.
Oh, that would have been a good career. I would have made a little more money.
They get banged around too.
For 3 years, I've maybe not so bad. Anyway.
Okay, anybody else? These have been great questions, and that was a really that was really helpful comment too, Lori.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, then I'm gonna sign off because Meredith insists on making dinner. So it was lovely. I think they have my email, right, as part of IROS? I think you do, and I love questions by email. It's a great way to learn. And thank you all for such good questions, and thank you all for what you do. And I'm signing off, and have a good rest of the week. Hopefully nobody gets hurricaned on.
And we'll get these studies out to you.
Great. Bye, everybody.